Welcome to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis, and today on the show, it's the Podheist of the century as we relive one of the biggest moments in WWE history, which took place at WrestleMania 31. I'll be reviewing with a good friend of mine, plus the latest in this year's WrestleMania as WWE comes back to Hollywood. We have a great show in store for you on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Tobacco Road Sports Radio, TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. All this and more next on the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. Welcome to Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis. And just before we get into all of this, because there's a lot, and I've had to invite somebody on the show to help me sort through all of this, because we rewatched WrestleMania 31 that took place back in 2015. Of course, last week we reviewed WrestleMania 21, which was obviously a big night in the WWE. John Cena win his first world championship. Batista win his first world championship. Edge win the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match, which he would later cash in on John Cena for the WWE title at New Year's Resolution 2006. All of that. Now this week, we are going to review WrestleMania 31 with my good friend Jason Sitek. You've seen him a lot on Out Pocket with Michael Davis. We're finally getting him on the podcast, the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. It's been a long time coming. If you've gotten to listen to any of our segments, you know we could talk for hours. And we have some of my best moments with Jason have been literally walk into his office, whether he was working with my dad or working at the college I would attend, and I would be late to class or I wouldn't get my homework done because I was talking professional wrestling or sports entertainment, this good old sport, as Gunther would say, with Jason. So we're going to cover everything WrestleMania 31 later on in the show. But if you get to be a part of the show, okay, maybe you're not Jason, maybe you're not getting on the camera and, talking to me about, I'm sure he has great fond memories of the WrestleMania 31 main event. But maybe you just want to send in a question or a comment. If you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube Live Tuesday night at 8:50 p.m., then you can obviously be a part of the show. Your comments will show up right here where my name is, as well as my Insta at Drop the Mic Wrestling. Go follow us for more content throughout the week. But we got to get into this year's WrestleMania before we welcome Jason into the show. And a lot of people are talking, and is it going to be the end of the tribal chief reign? Is it going to be Roman with no more reigns? Is he going to be a chief without a tribe? And Cody and Roman have built this into a good main event for night 2. Nobody's disappointed with this main event, much to the disarray that was the WrestleMania 31 main event headed in. We're going to talk about that a little later. Nobody's upset about Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes main event in WrestleMania this year. Nobody. But everybody's thinking that Cody wins it. The tribal chief falls at WrestleMania right before he gets to 1,000 days. And I'm telling you, and I've told people this for a long time, it's not happening. Apparently, there's reports, there's rumors that they don't quite know who's winning, if it's going to be Cody or Roman. But I'm telling you, Cody's losing. Okay? You do not get a character like Roman Reigns and get him so close to 1,000 days, which hasn't been seen in the modern era of wrestling. You have to go back to Hogan. You have to go back to Bruno. You have to go back Pedro. You have to go back to those guys to see someone hold the world title consecutively for 4 digits. Roman is not going to get this close to 1,000 days and lose. Period. I'm tired of people, and I'm not going to be shocked. I'm not going to be disappointed if Roman Reigns does lose. Cody's deserved it. Cody's earned it, everything. But I said this on my show so many times, and nobody's wanting to listen. Cody's losing at WrestleMania. He'll somehow get a rematch with Roman Reigns at SummerSlam. And SummerSlam in Detroit, that logo is sick, by the way, if anyone's seen it. That is where Roman Reigns will get dethroned at SummerSlam. And then Roman can take this rumored break from August all the way to January to the Royal Rumble because he's deserved that break. He won't have to go to Survivor Series. He won't have to hopefully go to Saudi Arabia. Like, he will have his time to just relax and chill. And Cody has already said that his idea of a world champion is being there every night. And that's the champion Cody would want to be. And I'm also upset with the remarks that people are making based on, oh, Cody's going to get burned out real quick if he does this. When is the last world champion of significance that's been there every single week? Okay, because we've had Roman Reigns for the last 3 years. Strowman and Wyatt were back and forth. Before that, you had Goldberg, you had Lesnar. I mean, you could mark Drew McIntyre when he was carrying the company on his back during COVID, between WrestleMania and into the fall. Drew McIntyre is a good example. Randy Orton, in terms of him holding the world title. AJ Styles, Dean Ambrose. AJ Styles would probably be the last guy who held the title for a significant amount of time that stayed every week and worked his butt off. But there's no, like, Lesnar, Goldberg, Reigns, and MJF now in AEW. Like, this idea of getting burnt out as a world champion is no big deal. I don't see Cody getting burnt out because I think he gets energized from doing the media appearances, from being that guy that younger guys can, rub off on, facing him off against Chad Gable. Like, Cody is that guy. Cody is going to work with Solo Sikoa. That is the type of guy Cody is. So Roman's not going to wrestle a smaller kind of guy. Roman's not going to wrestle Chad Gable or Otis, and that's fine. And that's the way he doesn't get burnt out, and he's held the title for a really long time. So everyone, give him a break, okay? Roman is perhaps the greatest world champion in my lifetime. I mean, how can you argue him almost holding it for 4 digits, which he will? The greatest Intercontinental champion in quite some time has been Gunther, and he finally has figured out who his opponents will be: Drew McIntyre and Sheamus. And all I can say is yes, please. If you watched the greatest WWE match of yesteryear of 2022, it was Gunther Sheamus Clash at the Castle. And what followed that up as a second, I don't know if it was a close second, just because of how much Gunther and Sheamus tore down the house. But the second match was Drew McIntyre challenging Roman Reigns. And that was the last time Roman's title's been in jeopardy other than the Sami Zayn Montreal. Gunther defending his title against Sheamus again would just sell me. Gunther defending his title against Drew McIntyre at WrestleMania, where Drew McIntyre is yet to host a title above his head at WrestleMania in front of fans, would be great. But you put all 3 of them in the ring together, this could be match of whichever night they do, night 1 or night 2. It's definitely going to be the most physical match you see on the show. And I could not be more excited for that. But this match may not be as physical, but it's definitely going to be emotional. And it's not been officially announced, but we are going into Friday Night SmackDown on Fox, 8 o'clock. Rey Mysterio is going to have his whole Mysterio family there. Aaliyah, Rey's wife, which is also the mother of Dominic Mysterio. Dominic's caught word of this, and he's already said he's coming to crash the family party on Friday night. So I'm telling you, this is one of the best feuds in a while, and I've compared it a lot to Undertaker versus Kane. Okay? Undertaker versus Kane. Undertaker refuses to fight his younger brother Kane. And for that moment, Undertaker's avoiding, and then you have the climax at WrestleMania. I believe that was WrestleMania 15. It was a great pay-per-view. That was also the first Rock Austin pay-per-view, first Rock Austin WrestleMania, if you rather. And the build to that was amazing, and Undertaker didn't want to do it. He didn't want to fight his younger brother, but he was left with no other choice. This is the same story, but instead of between brothers who always fight, it's between a father and a son. This will be other than Vince and Shane McMahon, which they aren't wrestlers. This, I believe, is the first father and son matchup, especially at WrestleMania. And we've been wanting this for so long. This is the last thing to check off Ray's bucket list. And we talked about this last week, that with Ray going into the Hall of Fame and Ray facing his son, this could be the final match we see of Rey Mysterio, but in wrestling, whoever really retires, right? So the whole Mysterio family is going to be on SmackDown. Buddy Murphy's Screen X, if you rather, Aaliyah, is going to be there. And this has to be Ray's breaking point. You didn't know what was going to be the breaking point for Rey Mysterio to wrestle his son. You just didn't know. And it's going to happen this week on SmackDown, where Ray's had it up to here. Ray's had enough. And it's going to be really difficult for Ray. It's going to be emotionally exhausting between Dom and Ray. But what's been probably the best story of the entire year since Triple H took over, it's really the Mysterio storyline that they've extended because Ray went to SmackDown to avoid fighting his son. They're doing their cross branding, but it's really the bloodline. The bloodline this is just announced. The Usos are defending their undisputed WWE Tag Team titles against Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, and it's about time. It's about time. And this is the best story in wrestling right now. This should main event night one. There's rumors going around that it's going to be Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley main event night one, just because Rhea won the Women's Royal Rumble, guaranteed a main event at WrestleMania. I'm just saying, Alberto Del Rio, which his name's been blackballed nowadays, he won the only 40-man Royal Rumble, and he was the opening act of the night. This is just you win the Royal Rumble, and you get a world title match of your choosing. Raw, SmackDown Women's title, Universal title, WWE title, World Heavyweight title, whatever the case was, you got a title opportunity at WrestleMania. Okay, you should not be guaranteed a main event, because this bloodline story, you have Owens and Zayn, best friends. I don't believe they've ever won the tag titles together, facing the longest reigning WWE Tag Team Champions in history, the Usos. You have them main event night one. And you have Owens and Zayn overcome the Usos, drawing so much interest into, will the bloodline completely crumble the next night as Roman Reigns faces Cody Rhodes? That is your story. You can't do anything better than that. This has the best build, unlike the men's and women's tag team fatal four-way showcases, where there's absolutely no build. I'm just assuming it's like to fluff up the 2-hour kickoff show that we'll probably get. This is going to be a really, really good WrestleMania. I'm excited for it. Okay. I hope it goes into the echelon of WrestleMania 21, which is my favorite WrestleMania that we reviewed last week as part of Mania Deja Vu. But now we're going to do my second one, which happens to be a California one. I'm not biased in terms of how I'm picking my WrestleManias, but after the break, I'm going to welcome in Jason Sitek, as he also has some strong opinions about WrestleMania 31. So you're going to stay tuned on Facebook Live, on YouTube. And if you're watching on Tobacco Road Sports Radio as the Wrestling Wednesday lineup, you can come in and listen to this WrestleMania 31 Deja Vu recap next after the break. Welcome back to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis, and it's about time that we get into this WrestleMania 31 recap. So I am being joined by the one, the only wise caveman, Mr. Jason Sitek. Jason, how are you doing, man?
I'm very good. Sort of like a false count at 2.999. I'm in here right at the absolute last possible minute to still be considered on time. But if you're not first, you're last. So it's always great to come in and sort of circle the drain of professional wrestling and that endless, imagine if we had all the time back that we've spent watching professional wrestling. We could be masters at anything. However, we are very good at watching television. Like, we're as good as, let's say, John Cena is at professional wrestling. We're that good at watching it, and so I think that speaks in our favor.
I'd say Cena is better at sports entertainment.
We're very good at consuming it. We're pretty good at being entertained by it. Let's put it that way.
Very entertained. And you were saying if we had gotten all those hours back of watching wrestling, if we didn't spend those hours gotten back watching more wrestling, we just would have a miserable life. And we went back and watched WrestleMania 31 that I remember distinctly, like coming up to you 2015. You must have been still working with my dad at the time in 2015, and coming in, I think sometime in that next week, it was probably that Wednesday after when I'd usually go to my dad's office, and we talked forever about this WrestleMania, and we finally get recorded. We finally get to share this conversation. So we'll go.
I know
what's
the rush? What's take? At least we did it so close to the actual event that we could actually record it for posterity. But no, I was like, I love recaps. Like, if there's one thing professional wrestling fans are good at, it's talking about things that happened in the past. And hindsight, very much 2020, I think, on this one.
2015 rather than 2020. We don't want to recap the COVID mania, but we do have the opening ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship, and I marked a few things with this. First of all, the fact that Stardust was annoyed by the Cody chants. I'm sure Cody would be annoyed by the Stardust chants if he got those at this year's WrestleMania.
Yeah, I always sort of joked, like, if I'm so I guess was Triple H in charge when Cody finally came back, or was Vince? Vince was still in charge.
Vince.
Okay, so and this is my only like hot take on that one. But if I'm Vince McMahon and Cody wants to come back, somewhere deep in that contract, there's got to be a one time only. You have to do Stardust one more time, and I get to choose it. And it's just like that. That's how I would have like renegotiated. Like, I'll pay you whatever you want. We'll strap the rocket to you. You'll look like a million bags full of $1 million. But one time, you're coming out as Stardust again. One time, and somewhere I hope that I'm actually right on that, because that's I think that would have been awesome. But my this WrestleMania is, in my opinion, and I had friends who were there live and just said it was awesome. Like just now, they were also in the sun for approximately 6.5 hours, which even though this is like, Northern California, you're still in the sun for 6.5 hours. Um, and so I think why, in some ways, like everyone remembers one very large particular moment in this WrestleMania, and rightfully so. Some of the early matches on this show, I don't feel like get the shine that they should, and part of it I think is because it is a West Coast start. So for a 7 p.m. East Coast Mania start, that means that this kicks off at 4 p.m. In Santa Clara. So these matches are in the sun, they're outside, they kind of look more reminiscent of like early WrestleManias when they would be in the middle of the day, like things like that. Um, all that to say, I think if this opening ladder match is inside, it's way more bonkers, but it's a bonkers match to open this WrestleMania. Um, I mean, it's I forget does like Luke Harper basically murders Dean Ambrose at one point.
Power bombs him through the ladder.
Yeah, and
Splits
is
in
never
half.
heard from again in that match. In my opinion, I think it was I forget it was a bunch of years later where eventually they did an opening ladder match like this again, and Sami Zayn was a big standout in it if I remember correctly, and Kevin Owens as well. Shocking, but like this was like this was a great opening match. I mean, it was hard hitting, it was bonkers. Obviously, the big storyline like coming out of it is like almost exactly a year ago is Daniel Bryan's like biggest moment in wrestling, and then here he is in the opening match winning a mid card belt. That now, in his defense, he wanted to win. 2015 was sort of the peak of people starting to realize that New Japan was sort of like hitting that initial peak, and I think that there had been some plans that Daniel always wanted to sort of like the WWE Intercontinental Belt and New Japan's Intercontinental Belt were both gold with a white strap. So I think there were going to be some attempts to cross market, try to do like a cross promotion, Nakamura versus Danielson type of a thing when Nakamura was just the absolute king. Obviously that never happened. Daniel Bryan, along with injuries that would shortly lead to his retirement, like never really got off the ground as the undisputed WWE champion. He's not that big of a guy, and he had to carry two belts around. So it just makes him look smaller when you have to do that. And so, it's the Rey Mysterio scenario again, just sort of like the cold feet. Daniel Bryan
Doesn't help that he got hurt. And I
it doesn't
feel
help
like
they got hurt. It doesn't help that like Kane was his first feud, like right out of like WrestleMania, which was just like this wasn't
putting him against
great.
the Undertaker.
Yeah, and he never got like we never got Daniel Bryan. We never got like storyline kayfabe. Batista never got his one-on-one title shot, for that title as a way of winning the Rumble. So now that was just an awesome time anyways, well, that's the WrestleMania before. In any case, Daniel Bryan wins. I loved this match. I thought it was great. I was legitimately concerned for Dean Ambrose for like a few minutes. I was like because they and I love this when it's done right. I love to see someone get killed dead in a wrestling match. Like if you're going to take him out, take him out. And it makes sense with Dean Ambrose that you would basically have to throw a building on top of him.
And it might have been one of the best multi-man ladder matches, period. I mean, because you had Bryan, you had Barrett, you had Ambrose, Ziggler, Harper, Truth, Cody / Stardust.
I mean, the next year they did the same thing again in Dallas
with Zack Ryder,
which was where Zack Ryder won, and that was the only feel-good match on that entire card. But there's at least one other. I think it was when they went back to Dallas, because I'm almost certain it was an indoors Mania when they did it. Maybe it was New Orleans again, but they did another. Maybe it was New Orleans when it was Mania 34 when they went back to New Orleans.
Yeah.
I think that had another really good opening ladder match. Heavy Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn involvement in that one. Um, you know, Kevin Owens as Kevin Steen battled El Generico quite a bit, famously with ladders in Ring of Honor. El Generico trained Sami Zayn before he left for Mexico to work with orphans.
Oh, that's who
So
El Generico is.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense that before El Generico leaves for Mexico, that he would inspire Sami Zayn to follow in those footsteps. Um, but yeah, the opening ladder matches I think they definitely have a place, and that I like having that open rather than like the Andre the Giant Battle Royal, which this was the
Oh.
first. This was the first Andre the Giant Battle Royal, wasn't it?
It was actually Cesaro in WrestleMania 30. Big Show won the
No,
kickoff.
okay. This was this. Okay, this was a second. So this is okay. Continue. I know we got to
Yeah.
keep walking down this card.
Yeah. We got Hey from Doug from East Tennessee. Maybe a ETSU grad, who knows? But perhaps one of the best ladder matches of all time, followed by perhaps the best RKO ever with Randy Orton getting that RKO on Seth
Yes.
Rollins. The match is good. I don't know if this loss matters so much to Seth Rollins based on what would happen later on that we'll get into in the next segment. This
Yeah,
has
I
to be the
think
best RKO ever.
was Randy Orton excited to not lose at WrestleMania? Absolutely. At first, was Seth Rollins probably disappointed to lose his first solo match at WrestleMania? Almost certainly. And then, right before the show, he gets whispered in his ear, like, hey, man, you're going to eat this pin, but
Stick around. There's more.
yeah. So as it turns out, like, I don't think this bothered Seth Rollins in the long run. This didn't matter to Seth Rollins at all in terms of like his character or who he eventually like came into be. And he was always talented. I think he was going to be a star no matter what, even if the end of this show doesn't happen. But this was, I mean, it was a really well wrestled match. I think it is hampered by the fact that it's in the sun, and a lot of the complaints here, I think, is just if it wasn't daylight outside, this whole show looks and feels totally different. But it is a very good WrestleMania.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because that was my big knock on this. And it's what I'm worried about with WrestleMania going to California, SoFi Stadium, how much light's going to shine through that stadium. But the next match was Triple H and Sting. And just both those entrances look so much better if it's not in the sun at like 4 p.m. Central Time or Pacific.
Yeah, and we should say most of the entrances on this show are in the daylight. I think it's
Undertaker, Bray Wyatt later on, also in the daylight.
Yeah, I mean Sting and Triple H. This was Triple H's like Terminator entrance, if I remember correctly.
Yep,
It's pretty
Schwarzenegger.
Cool.
That's my Schwarzenegger impression, by the way.
It's not great. He's actually, his auto pen is on my bachelor's degree because he was the governor of California when I graduated. So that's the auto pen there. But
that's the fun fact of the night if you're listening to this podcast right now.
Yeah, totally. But no, I mean this match, I think this is one of those ones where like this really was more the moment than just like Sting is wrestling in WWE. Now that it's all sort of like said and done and AEW exists, I think it would have been. Now, this is totally like a hindsight wish because nobody knew AEW was going to happen. At this point, it was just WWE. And like, I mean, ROH and TNA were around, but they were never going to do the numbers or anywhere close that WWE was. Would it have been awesome if Sting never showed up in WWE and just totally is a surprise, like AEW signee and shows up? And then, like, yes, that would have been so awesome for him to have never been there.
That's not where I was going with it, though.
But yeah, like it was the moment. Like it was cool. Like he finally got his inductee. Like the ending of this match, I think is questionable.
Triple
You know,
H going over, basically
triple
rotting on WCW the whole time.
right. I mean, which is again very par for the course for Vince's Booker. Like, it's not exactly unusual for Triple H to go over against WCW talent who probably should have gone over. Like, give me a dollar
Goldberg,
if you've heard that one before.
Booker
So
T.
yeah, and so I mean the match itself was fine. Like it was very clear that I don't know, like Sting sort of hit a fountain of youth in AEW in some ways, but like he looked fine. I think everyone was just more focused in on like when are Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and Hulkster going to show up, and they did, and it was sort of like that like stare down, but like the burying of the hatchet was, I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
really needed that olive branch so much as they just had to like find a way to end this. Um,
And Michael Cole hammered on with that olive branch, whatever. But I mean, Sting and
yeah,
Triple H was a dream match, but I could have went without it. The fact that we had, and especially looking back now and knowing we never got it, the fact that we had Sting and The Undertaker in the same company at WrestleMania time, wrestling on the same night, how
yeah,
do you not
and
get
you
that
had
dream match?
and you had 5 months to build it because Sting comes out at the end of Survivor Series that year. Do you remember who the sole survivor was that year as a result of Sting's interference? Dolph Ziggler was
Oh,
the
right.
sole survivor, I think, for either the second in 3 years or 2 years in a row. Was the sole survivor.
He's here to show the world, guys.
He is here to show the world indeed. Um, and so with that, like, yeah, you had 5 months to make this happen. In a company where plans change during the show, they definitely could have made it happen. Um, it's
It was disappointing.
considering what has sort of become of Undertaker's opponent at this match, at this WrestleMania. It probably was a much better thing to do. Um, I, if they should have done Undertaker versus Sting, almost certainly.
They should have. Don't use that as an excuse to rag on Bray Wyatt. We'll have to get
Oh, I
that
don't
in.
need an excuse. I can literally come up with any number of reasons.
Hey, he's showing up this year at WrestleMania. Everybody, calm down. Um, but this ended up being, was this Sting's last WrestleMania?
It was his only WrestleMania
His first and last.
because he showed up then, and then he eventually wrestled
Seth
Seth
Rollins,
Rollins at Night of
and then
Champions,
that hurt.
where
That
he
ended his
nearly like
WWE career.
had his body kind of started failing him early in that match, and then he basically had his head broken off from a buckle bomb a little bit later, and then it was sort of like, well, I'll just do the comic book circuit and show up, but then like AEW happens, and he's a legitimately like I'm going to see a good Sting wrestling match like in AEW, which is crazy. Uh,
So,
like
would you believe me if I told you this was Sting's second to last match in WWE and AJ Lee's second to last match in WWE?
was
Because
that
she
yeah.
followed up right after teaming with Paige to face the Bella Twins, beat them in terms of what a real diva role model should be in
Hmm.
WWE. And then AJ wrestled like a 6-woman's tag the next night on Raw and announced her retirement.
Yep, that was it. I mean, famously, CM Punk had been gone for just
About
over a
15
year.
months. Yeah.
Yeah, just over a year at this point. So, I mean, I don't think anyone was really surprised that AJ Lee didn't stick around. It was kind of like a passing the torch moment. Um, but in a lot of other ways, it was also like a really great moment because I think, Paige very much came into her own like right around now. But also like I think the Bella Twins, to their credit, got started to get a lot better around this point as well. Especially as sort of the off-screen Cena and Nikki romance began heavily as well, depending on what someone's
Off
feelings are on
screen,
that, it's, well, as
on
off.
screen on Total Divas.
Yeah, there's a kayfabe and a non-kayfabe version of that romance, I'm sure, depending on which Total Divas or Total Bella's crew was there. But yeah, I I remember this match not being like bad. It was just like I don't think anyone was actually there to see that match. And that's not a dig at anyone. I think they did the best that they could. I was happy to see AJ and Paige win. I think that's really cool that Paige basically got her first, Mania to win it like that with a person who, without AJ Lee, Paige probably doesn't have the impact in the company that she does.
Right, because Paige beat AJ her first night in the company, win the Divas title, ended up being on the movie. And
And
unfortunately, this was probably used as a bathroom break. Like right now, we're about to use a little quick commercial break. But when we come back, we're going to open with John Cena versus Rusev for the United States title, the undefeated Rusev. And usually we disappear our faces, but if you're watching on Facebook Live and YouTube, you can comment and your comment can pop up on the screen. But we'll keep our faces on the screen for the next 16 seconds or so. Welcome back to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis. Now, my original intention was to keep our faces on screen because I could see Jason jiving, and then he turned it to the mass luchador, the mass superstar, if you will. But we're continuing this WrestleMania 31 Deja Vu. And after our bathroom break of the Divas Tag Team match, we got John Cena versus Rusev. Now, my opinions on this was it was a good match, but this is when John Cena started to reinvent his in-ring style to fit with the times in 2015 because, spoiler alert, John Cena would beat Rusev's first loss in the company that people actually called the burial of Rusev's career, which I'm going to go ahead and say it's probably just his signing with AEW after he lost the TNT title. But this was really the catalyst for Cena's U.S. Open Challenge, where he would showcase and highlight a lot of these younger guys. And honestly, ever since his match with The Rock at WrestleMania 29, most of his WrestleManias have been used for showcasing younger talent. So kudos to John Cena for being.
Yeah, John Cena does not have a great WrestleMania record. He's got some all-time incredible matches. Definitely some super big ones, but typically, and this will always separate Cena from some of the other guys, is in some ways realizing that the biggest thing he could do to show, for the company was to lose some of these matches and make these other guys into bigger names. I was howling with pure unadulterated joy during the entrances of this match when Rusev came out in a tank. I was like, this is so awesome. Rusev is so awesome, especially at this point. It was just tremendous to see this come in. Was such a cool, especially like you said, coming off of the two WrestleManias prior, which were against The Rock, for Cena to be able to say no, I'm gonna do a mid-show match against an up and comer. Should Cena have won?
It's up for debate.
Up for debate. I think, and I am fairly certain Stone Cold Steve Austin will back me up on this, is that the company sort of failed Rusev from this point moving forward, because you can have a big debut. Again, the way you spin this is Rusev is so big, he's so powerful, he's so good that he forced John Cena to learn a sixth move in order to beat him, which is exactly what happened, where we had the summer of the springboard stunner from John Cena, and even worse than that is we had Michael Cole saying the word springboard stunner for about 4 or 5 months afterwards. And I like Michael Cole a great deal. I should be totally honest there. But
He probably had the line of his career tonight
oh
a
yeah,
little later
yeah.
on to the show.
And so like, I mean, again, there's ways you spin that. Like, this is the company who will say, like, this is the only night when Raw and SmackDown go head to head, and they'll say that a million times during Survivor Series. So, like,
Overdone.
it's definitely they have the ability to say this is the guy that forced John Cena to learn a new offense because he's so good. You know, it's basic, like, you know, build your fights 101 to do that. So I don't think Rusev like had to win in retrospect. It would have been great to see. You know, like you said, we got the open challenge out of it, which, you know, essentially, you know, became a really big deal when Kevin Owens shows up and power bombs John into the apron, steps on the U.S. title and holds the NXT title over it, and then beats John Cena at that like immediate pay-per-view match. So like, yeah, I mean, this. Speaking of people who now also use stunners, you know, just catapulted Kevin Owens because of it, which was, you know, great to see. It was a good match. I think I still lean towards I wish Rusev had won, just because it was sort of one of those things like John Cena didn't need to win, especially after like John beat Bray Wyatt the year before. And I misspoke earlier, you know, about the two previous being against The Rock. I forgot that he wrestled Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 30 the year before, and so
beat Bray
again. You know, would not be the first time that Bray Wyatt loses at WrestleMania.
Wouldn't be the last.
Yeah, We still have to get to his match on this show.
Yeah, we do.
And so as we sort of like, you know, go forward, the match was fine. I probably would have changed the result, but the entrance is just such a high point. One of the high points of the night, in my opinion, is Rusev coming out in a tank.
And that's one of the good things about WrestleMania, especially like being in daylight. This was an entrance that didn't need a closed off stadium. But before we get into Bray Wyatt's entrance that should have been in a stadium, darkened.
Oh, yeah.
Undertaker's should have been dark.
This was like peak lantern mode.
We do have a really long, and I love Triple H, love Stephanie, love The Rock, love their characters. This was kind of a painful segment to go back and rewatch. I think I enjoyed it in the time, but if you don't remember, Triple H and Stephanie McMahon in the ring together, and they're talking trash. Then The Rock comes out. The Rock gets a huge pop, and then Stephanie bullies The Rock out of the ring. The Rock walks over to get Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey hip tosses Triple H and almost threatens to break Stephanie McMahon's arm. And this honestly set the tone for Ronda Rousey's track to WWE. 8 years later, I know it's a hot take. I consider Rousey more of a WWE star than UFC. But the big thing I came away with this rewatching is we got so many teases, you know, this, and then The Rock and Triple H staring off at backstage on SmackDown. We never got The Rock and Triple H one more time.
No, and I think everyone keeps expecting The Rock to show up for one more match, and he probably will at some point. I'm not like, I don't really need to see it. Like, I don't particularly want to. Like, I think the Cena match at 29 was a really good send off. Now, obviously, there's certainly precedent. See last year for somebody coming back after a very long time to get a true sort of like send off match.
What
or is it?
What?
Yeah. Now, why you want to go and do that, Kevin? Is like one of my favorite promo lines ever. Complete sidebar. I love that whole pre-taped promo of him driving in like the Polaris out in the field. And I feel like he had that whole thing in his head memorized. He just needed the name to put into it. 'Cause it's like you can't teach that. is Steve. Steve is Steve. But yeah, I remember like my mind being like, this is crazy. Like this whole segment, just sort of like, and 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 sort of like the meta-ness of this moment is there's a lot of UFC crossover with this WrestleMania, anyways. Some of which is alluded to in my display name here. That all feeds into the final moment, but there's like UFC is sort of like circling this show anyways because of the main event and everything that was going on there. But then like to see this was an unexpected moment where you really didn't expect to see Ronda Rousey in a ring like that. It's fun to like go back. A highlight of this moment is to watch Jessamine Duke and Marina Shafir and Shayna Baszler like absolutely geek out on the sides. Like
Shayna
to
was a
see,
fan.
like the moment she crosses over, they go bananas, like seeing their friend on the other side of the fence for that moment. And like a little context, like those four, like the NXT four horsewomen are called that because they wanted to take that name away from Jessamine and Marina and Ronda and Shayna, who were already calling themselves the four horsewomen. So, but then also those four were typically seen, you'd see them a lot at like PWG shows at the time in Rosita as well. Like they were fans, like they loved pro wrestling. So it was a really cool moment going back, watching Triple H and Stephanie McMahon promos at that point is I would rather go to the dentist because this is still very much like they're the authority and we know what's best for business and whatever. Like the moment created itself to serve itself, and it certainly accomplished that. And it was got a ton of people talking about it, and it was genuinely cool and like you said, set up Ronda's eventual run after that. I mean, is she? I don't know. I don't think she's a bigger star in WWE. I think people just forget how hot WrestleMania or how hot Ronda Rousey was as a star and I don't mean that in terms of like the like attractiveness. I mean it was like she was just a white hot fighter in UFC. I mean she was dismantling people like in the ring in record times. I mean she was a force. This was just awesome, and this was like the peak of that.
And I should rephrase what I said. Not that she's a bigger star in WWE than UFC, but rather than looking at her as, oh, this is a UFC star coming out for like a celebrity match, or like Logan Paul, how I'm looking at him, Bad Bunny, Ronda's like, okay, I'm a WWE superstar. I'm going to take this on.
And she, I mean, and we have Holly Holm to thank for that in a big way. Ronda's kind of fall from grace in that point. We could do a whole show just on that if we really wanted to.
That's really true.
But this was a fine moment. It was a great palate cleanse for the rest of the show. I think it was a much better halftime show than most Super Bowls. I think that's a very fair and complimentary analysis of this segment.
Yeah, and we only had 2 matches left to go because now we finally get to Bray Wyatt Undertaker. We've already beaten the horse dead about.
Okay, so before we go into that, okay. I do want to make one mention, and this is I will always be bitter that I never got this match. Is Shaquille O'Neal was in the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. And this is where they had started to tease a Big Show versus Shaq match.
And we never got it.
And eventually we got Shaq versus Cody in AEW, which was so much better than it had any right to be. And Shaq belongs on TNT because what he does with Charles Barkley on NBA coverage is better than any late night television show. But it was just like one of these funny moments. Like people forget, like they were legitimately trying to do like a Shaq versus Big Show match, which would have been just awesome.
Especially seeing how much Big Show did, like his Akibono match that we covered last week on the show. Big Show did a lot. Floyd Money Mayweather. can't talk, and we still got 2 matches to go. So wish us luck. This is why I invite Jason on, because he's so much better at talking than I am. But Wyatt versus Undertaker. This was Undertaker's redemption. Hadn't been seen in over a year. He
That's
got
right.
concussed in that Brock Lesnar match. There was one WrestleMania moment. Bray Wyatt's doing his, crawl, and then Taker sits up. You had to do this match if you're producing it. And my only question was like, I enjoyed it. I love Bray Wyatt. I may be biased on that. This was a good match. It looked like Taker had a little bit left in the tank. But would this have mattered more? I think this is a yes. Would it matter more if Taker had stayed undefeated and not lost to Brock Lesnar the year before? Or was it a perfect redemption story?
Perfect, no. Redemption story, yes. Is probably the best way to put it. Like, I think so. Again, my display name, Wise Caveman, which we'll get into the meaning of that, but very much attributed to Brock Lesnar. I love Brock Lesnar. I legitimately gasped when I was watching WrestleMania 30 live on the WWE Network on the large screen of my iPhone 4 in my house, because it was the only thing that was pulling a good enough signal so my face was 6 inches from the screen to make it seem bigger. So like I had no problem with like the streak ending, because the point was to get Brock over, and holy crap, did that do it. People forget 2015. Just white hot year for Brock Lesnar coming out of this too. And so, I mean, it was fine. My biggest gripe is, I really wanted them to do this at some point, and they never did it. Is if I could have fantasy booked this entrance, because no one had seen Undertaker in a year. And what's the best thing to do to somebody when you haven't seen them in a long time is
raise them from a casket.
Raise them from a pack, or is a repackage. And so
you're not on the American Biker. Okay.
No, so much better, because a lot of people still thought this could be Undertaker's last match as well. I have always dreamed of the Undertaker coming out in white for like one last. If I could have fantasy booked Undertaker's last match, is you have him come out in white or something very pale, and you do the Johnny Cash, which they had sort of alluded to in the build up to this match, is when the man comes around, and you say, now the opening to that song on that album is, and I looked and I saw a pale horse, and his name was Death. I was like, have him come out in like a whitish pale thing, play that song, and then, work the gong and do something. And then people would be like, we're going to see something really crazy right now. And it, like, in my opinion, elevates that match way higher than what it was. The match itself was fine. I don't have an issue. At this point, Bray Wyatt becomes 0-2 at WrestleMania.
Against Cena and Undertaker. So
if I remember correctly, he loses again in Dallas to The Rock. And then he loses.
He doesn't wrestle.
Okay,
against The
but
Rock.
He effectively loses that feud.
That's like an hair growing kind of thing.
Yep, and he loses, in my opinion, one of the worst matches of all time the next year. So he goes.
Against
it's 5 WrestleManias before he wins, maybe, and I don't even remember if he wins the one after that. Like, I just discounted it, but like, so Wyatt was sort of in one of those positions of like, he was almost getting to the point of like, and I hate to say this because I like the guy and I think he's talented. It's sort of like the Murder Hawk monster Lance Archer in AEW. Is like when he shows up, you're just like, God. Okay, well, I know who's losing this match now. And that's sort of like where we started to get with Bray and feuds is, and part of it was Vince just getting cold feet, because if Bray wins, his wins would like sort of necessitate a sea change in the environment of WWE, just based on the supernatural and all that stuff. And they were just like, no, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And like, whatever, like, that's fine.
So It's against Vince's booking rather than Bray Wyatt. Just to be clear,
I think at a certain point, Bray's willingness to go along with Vince's booking has always played well for him, or has extended his career in some big ways. I don't think it has always been good for him in the like me taking him seriously as someone on my screen sense. Because eventually you get to the point it's like, ooh, he's going to say something crazy. The lights are going to go out and he's going to lose. Like, do wins and losses matter? No, but they do. And so,
especially at WrestleMania, where Undertaker made his mark.
yeah. So if you're trying to book this person as like, it's hard to find a like the reason why there's only been one Undertaker and one Sting is because it's really hard to do the supernatural thing well, and it's very rare. And they probably had the best chance that they ever had in Bray Wyatt, and just never gave anyone a reason to take it seriously.
And what people weren't taking seriously was this main event. We'll have to cram into the last few minutes of the show because it's Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns won. And the best way I could describe this was the big fight feel nobody actually wanted to see. But
I was so geeked up for this match.
why? So, I didn't want, nobody wanted to see this.
Because this was, I probably felt like that. So again, like the big news story like about it was, is Brock going to go to UFC and
Which
leave?
He resigned
or is he going to stay with WWE? At this point, everyone thinks of Brock as a legitimate heel, and they're just sort of like reluctantly accepting Roman going to win. But then Brock drops the wise old caveman line with Michelle Beadle on ESPN the day before saying, my heart wants to go to UFC. My body knows that it probably can't take that, and I have a family to feed. So I'm going to re-sign with WWE, and gave the most babyface promo on ESPN that all of a sudden people was like, he's not leaving. We have a reason to like not boo him, which against Roman is as good of a reason to cheer Brock as anything. So all of a sudden, complete shift is that now WWE has to book this as you have to somehow get Roman over in this match as a babyface when people know Brock isn't leaving and therefore want him to win, which is a really tough situation to be in. Spoiler alert, even with how perfectly everything was executed in this match, my hottest take is that Roman should have won this match, because you still get everything that we have now, but you probably get it faster if Roman wins. And the number one way I know is like shortly before. I mean, this is the birth of Suplex City. No, that
was John Cena.
No,
John Cena,
right? But this is the like Suplex City B word match. Like that's where that became a thing, because he suplexes Roman and goes Suplex City expletive, which
is Michael's like, I can't repeat that.
But it becomes one of the greatest WrestleMania lines ever. But
I always felt a shame. This is a shame this isn't out of pocket, because that would have been out of pocket take right there, because this was the heist of the century. This was Michael Cole's famous line. I went bonkers at 16.
I went bonkers at, how old was I? I don't know, 20.
This is 2015. You don't have to disclose that on air.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, we're not trying to age anyone. We're not.
Yeah. The Money Bank originating in California 10 years prior came full circle with the first ever WrestleMania cash.
It was perfectly executed. It was perfectly executed, and awesome. Yet, there's a point in this match, and this is why I know that I'm right about Roman, is because I felt myself turning for Roman about 2/3 of the way through this match, and just being so conflicted about it, of just like, oh my gosh, they're doing it. Like Vince is like, this was him at his best, of just like, they're getting me to want Roman to win this match. Like, it was just like, I don't think Roman and Brock have wrestled this well since. They may have had matches I've enjoyed more. Each one of them, like I loved Brock versus Goldberg. I loved Brock versus Orton, where he just like busts him wide open. But this was them at their best. And again, like Seth Rollins just pulling it off. And, gets Vince out of a big jam on that. But I don't think anyone would have been harmed if Roman had won, and it really would have set up some cool stuff down the road. But I mean, all in all, there's no way you watch this WrestleMania, at least for the opening match, the halftime show, and that last match, and don't come away saying like, well, that was worth the $9.99 I paid on the WWE network for it.
It was my second favorite WrestleMania, and unfortunately, we're past time, which kind of stinks because you and I could talk about this WrestleMania for.
We're just getting started.
We're just getting started. We may stay on and just talk afterwards, but we got to get out of here for the Wrestling Wednesday lineup to continue. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. And this has been the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. Next week, we preview or we do deja vu of last year's WrestleMania, looking back a year from now. So everyone have a great week and just get ready for Dominic to beat up his family on Friday SmackDown.